Why did Congress take recess just days before the Epstein vote?
As you all know, I speak to the president multiple times a day on a typical day, often, always. And what I know about the president's heart on this is that he agrees with everything I've said here today. He wants maximum transparency, but he's also very insistent that we do not subject people who have already been victims of unspeakable crimes to further public scrutiny. And it would be a very dangerous thing to put those people's names out or to do a release of information in a way that is haphazard where they could be easily unmasked.
Before we get to why there is even a vote to begin with, we have to understand a timeline. A timeline I like to dub when shit hits the fan. Enter Pam Bondi. Here's what really happened and how the Epstein cover-up started to fall apart. On July 7th, Pam Bondi's DOJ quietly releases the Epstein memo. There was no press conference, no signature, just a PDF uploaded to the government website claiming there's no client list and no foul play. On July 13th, Wired publishes its initial report, noticing about 1 minute missing from the Epstein prison footage. A small discrepancy at first. Then comes July 15th. Wired updates their analysis. It wasn't just a minute, it was nearly 3 full minutes missing from the so-called raw surveillance video. On July 16th, the pressure hits. Trump tells his base to move on from the Epstein case. Pam Bondi steps in, blaming the missing footage on a system reset, but the internet isn't buying it. That same day, Trump calls the entire thing a hoax and blames Obama. Public interest explodes.
It's just a subject. He's dead, he's gone, and all it is the Republicans, certain Republicans got duped by the Democrats, and they're following a Democrat playbook. And no different than Russia, and all the other hoaxes. They're started by the Democrats.
Now on to the infamous day, July 17th, a bipartisan move by Representatives Thomas Massey and Ro Khanna introducing legislation and a discharge petition to force the release of the full Epstein files. Now, after all that we have learned regarding the Epstein file, on July 18th, in an attempt to subvert the public's attention, DNI, Tulsi Gabbard, drops a political bomb, declassified files accusing Obama-era officials of treasonous manipulation tied to the Russia investigation. Fast forward July 22nd, Speaker Johnson abruptly adjourns the House, shutting it down before the Epstein vote can be called. On that same day, Trump doubles down, publicly accusing Obama of treason, and for the first time, Obama's office responds.
It's there, he's guilty. This was treason.
U.S. President Donald Trump accused former President Barack Obama of treason on Tuesday. Without providing evidence, he said Obama led an effort to falsely tie him to Russia and undermine his 2016 presidential campaign.
They tried to steal the election. They tried to obfuscate the election. They did things that nobody's ever even imagined, even in other countries.
Trump was seizing on comments from his intelligence chief, Tulsi Gabbard, last Friday. Gabbard said at the time she was releasing documents that showed a, quote, treasonous conspiracy in 2016 by top Obama administration officials to undermine Trump by manufacturing intelligence on Russia's interference in the election. That charge is contradicted by a CIA review published earlier this month, a 2018 bipartisan Senate report, and the documents that Gabbard herself declassified. Trump has recently been seeking to divert attention to other issues after coming under pressure from his conservative base to release more information about Jeffrey Epstein. The disgraced financier and sex offender died by suicide in 2019 while awaiting trial on sex trafficking charges. Backers of conspiracy theories about Epstein have urged Trump, who socialized with him during the 1990s and early 2000s, to release investigative files.
This isn't random. This is real-time scramble to suppress the truth, and this timeline is the receipt.
August 1's, who was Miami U.S. Attorney Alex Costa, he allegedly said that he did work for an intelligence agency. So could you resolve whether or not he did? And also, could you say why there was a minute missing from the jailhouse tape on the next day?
Yeah, sure. If I
Pam, could I just interrupt for
Sure.
1 second? Are you still talking about Jeffrey Epstein? This guy's been talked about for years. You're asking, we have Texas, we have this, we have all of the things. And are people still talking about this guy, this creep? That is unbelievable. Do you want to waste the time and do you feel like answering?
I don't mind answering.
I mean, I can't believe you're asking a question on Epstein at a time like this where we're having some of the greatest success and also tragedy with what happened in Texas. It just seems like a desecration, but you go ahead.
Sure. First, to back up on that, in February, I did an interview on Fox, and it's been getting a lot of attention because I said, I was asked a question about the client list, and my response was, it's sitting on my desk to be reviewed, meaning the file along with the JFK, MLK files as well. That's what I meant by that. Also, to the tens of thousands of video, they turned out to be child porn downloaded by that disgusting Jeffrey Epstein. Child porn is what they were. Never going to be released, never going to see the light of day. To him being an agent, I have no knowledge about that. We can get back to you on that. And the minute missing from the video, we released the video showing definitively the video was not conclusive, but the evidence prior to it was showing he committed suicide. And what was on that, there was a minute that was off the counter. And what we learned from Bureau of Prisons was every night, they redo that video. It's old, from like 1999. So every night the video is reset, and every night should have the same minute missing. So we're looking for that video to release. And the minute.
And don't forget, one of the key witnesses in the Epstein-Maxwell case is now dead. Virginia Giuffre, the woman who publicly accused Jeffrey Epstein and Maxwell for years, was found dead just a few weeks ago. The New York Times calls it an apparent suicide, but go read the transcript from Maxwell's trial. It's public record. Virginia once said on the record that she was not suicidal. So when she dies, just as the Epstein memo drops, just as Maxwell is rumored to be cutting a deal, that's not coincidence. That's a pattern.
Have you ever had a personal relationship with Donald Trump?
What do you mean by personal relationships?
Have you socialized with him?
Yes, sir.
Yes?
Yes, sir.
Have you ever socialized with Donald Trump in the presence of females under the age of 18?
Though I'd like to answer that question, at least today, I'm going to have to assert my 5th, 6th, and 14th Amendment rights.
On January 3rd, 2024, over 900 pages of Epstein-Maxwell exhibits were dumped into the public record. Handwritten notes, calendars, flight logs, emails, and more, implicating names like Prince Andrew, Dershowitz, Glenn Dubin, Leon Black, and others. But guess what? The New York Times didn't cover it, and the AP buried it in just 220 words, no mention of names. As of April 2025, Ghislaine Maxwell is petitioning the U.S. Supreme Court, docket number 24-1073. Her team argues her criminal trial was poisoned by media hysteria and a disproportionate focus on non-criminal associations. That opens the potential for names she believes were smeared, including Trump or Clinton, to be brought in if the court mandates a new trial. Now, new evidence has surfaced showing Bill Clinton's name in Jeffrey Epstein's flight records. And it's not buried in conspiracy theory, it's direct from court-mandated exhibits. In fact, a February 2025 analysis listed Clinton among those on the infamous flight log, alongside names like Naomi Campbell and Alan Dershowitz.
Welcome back, keyboard warriors. I am Brian Allen, and tonight we stop pretending the world's most convenient suicide was the end of the story. My first guest, the man who grabbed the receipts before the shredders warmed up, Nick Bryant, journalist and founder of Epstein Justice, and keeper of the little black book that scares billionaires into prayer. Nick, after 13 years digging through flight logs and victim affidavits, I believe you can tell us flat out, did Jeffrey Epstein act alone, and did the Department of Justice know about it?
Did Jeffrey Epstein act alone? I'm amazed that we're even having that debate, to tell you the truth. Was the fountainhead of that was the memo that came out of the Department of Justice and FBI last week that no one bothered to sign. I get a kick out of that. Trump didn't sign it, Bonnie didn't sign it, Patel didn't sign it. No one wanted to sign such an absurd document. With the Department of Justice, they absolutely covered it up. And to wind back time, a 14-year-old girl told her mother that she'd been molested by Jeffrey Epstein. And her mother and her father went to the Palm Beach Police Department. And the girl described Jeffrey Epstein's home and Jeffrey Epstein's anatomy. Up until that point, the Palm Beach Police Department had just looked upon Jeffrey Epstein as a philanthropic type. And so they believed the girl, and then they launched an investigation. For about a year, they pursued it, going up against someone that has what they felt a pristine reputation. He's very wealthy, but they eventually had 5 victims on record, or 5 victim statements, but they knew of 17 others. And in addition to those 5 victims, there was 17 victims that corroborated those 5 victims. So the Palm Beach Police Department were going to, at least right out of the gate, indict Jeffrey Epstein on 4 counts of unlawful sexual activity with the minors, and also 1 count of lewd and lascivious molestation. And that case was taken away from them and given to a grand jury. And I don't know if your audience is familiar with grand juries, but grand juries are very easy to hijack because a prosecutor is chosen to present evidence to the grand jurors. And grand jurors are just people that have shown up for jury duty that have been funneled to a grand jury. And it's not adversarial at all. Evidence is presented by the special prosecutor and witnesses are called by the special prosecutor. And although the state of Florida was aware of 23 Epstein victims, they called 2. And one had been molested by Jeffrey Epstein when she was 14, and she was 16. One had been molested repeatedly by Jeffrey Epstein when she was 16, and she was now 18. And I've got the transcripts of what went down at that grand jury, and it's very, very corrupt. That grand jury didn't indict Jeffrey Epstein on a single count of perjury, and they were calling these victims prostitutes. I mean, the whole thing was corrupt. There was a New York Supreme Court justice who said that special prosecutors have so much power over grand jurors that they could get them to indict a ham sandwich. And that not indicting Jeffrey Epstein on a single count of child abuse was essentially indicting him on a ham sandwich. And Michael Ryder is the real hero in this story. Michael Ryder was the chief of the Palm Beach Police Department, and he took a lot of heat. He would not back down. He was threatened, he was followed, but the dude was solid. If it hadn't been for Michael Ryder, we wouldn't even know the name Jeffrey Epstein. So Michael Ryder he called that grand jury the greatest miscarriage of justice in modern times. And he went to the Department of Justice and he said, you guys have got to investigate Jeffrey Epstein. And at that point, the Department of Justice had the names of 34 underage victims on a list. I've got that list, but they were aware of 40 underage victims. And then what happened was very macabre. Now we really get into the Department of Justice's collusion with the Epstein team, and then just the utter perfidiousness of it. What happened was the feds were going to impanel a grand jury to investigate Jeffrey Epstein, but they backed out of it. And then they started negotiations with Jeffrey Epstein and his dream team of attorneys. And the deal that they cooked up was really rotten. I've got emails from one of Jeffrey Epstein's attorney, Jay Lefkowitz, to the assistant U.S. attorney, Anne-Marie Villafana. And it just shows how corrupt that investigation was. And Anne-Marie Villafana and Jay Lefkowitz have cooked up this deal that's so dirty that there's only one magistrate that they feel will sign off on it. And they picked this magistrate. And I've got the email on it, which really condemns them. So ultimately what happened is the feds went and made a non-prosecution agreement with Jeffrey Epstein. And according to the Victim Crimes Rights Act, victims of crimes have to be kept abreast of the adjudication of their perpetrators. And they also get to confront their perpetrators at some point. But the feds bifurcated that and completely cooked up this deal with Jeffrey Epstein, and then they sealed it. Nobody knew that they didn't apprise the victims of the deal that they were making with Jeffrey Epstein, and then they sealed it so that no one could see it. And then a couple of attorneys representing victims in the Palm Beach Post, they appealed the sealing of that document, and then the judge was going to unseal it, and then the feds appealed that, and then the 11th Circuit Federal Circuit finally decided that the document should be unsealed. And what that does was so horrible. That document gave blanket immunity to all of Jeffrey Epstein's perpetrators and co-conspirators. Gave blanket immunity to everybody except Jeffrey Epstein. And the feds said that the state, they worked out the sentence with and Epstein was sentenced. He was looking at 20 years at that point because they did indict them on one count of unlawful sexual activity with a minor. So he was looking at 20 years. He got 18 months and he did 30 months in the county jail. And they would let him out during the day and he would continue molesting underage girls. That was his thing, and that's how corrupt that whole deal was. So Alexander Acosta was the U.S. attorney who oversaw that dirty deal. He was the U.S. attorney for Southern Florida. And he was chosen to be Trump's labor secretary in the first Trump administration. And he was asked, why did you go so light on Jeffrey Epstein? And he said, I was told that Jeffrey Epstein was intelligence and I had to stand down. And there's only two, and this is the kind of power that was deployed to cover up Epstein's pedophile network. There's only two people in the government that can tell a U.S. attorney to stand down. One is the attorney general, and one is the president. Those are the only two people. And at that time, the case started with the Palm Beach Police Department in 2005, but then it went into 2007 when that dirty deal was struck. And ultimately, the attorney general told the U.S. attorney to stand down and not prosecute Jeffrey Epstein. But here's the thing with that. The attorney general, Alberto Gonzales, he's not going to cover up a nationwide pedophile network and take the fall unless his boss, the president, says that he should do it. So that came from the highest regions of the Bush II administration, that cover-up. And then Obama took over, and then Obama did nothing with it. And then Trump took over, and Trump did nothing with it. And then Biden took over, and Biden did nothing with it. So, and what Trump has done is he said that he was going to release the files on Jeffrey Epstein. And he put the white elephant in the living room. He's tried to kill the white elephant, but he put the white elephant in the living room. And regardless of if the white elephant is killed or maimed, it's still in the living room. But when we get to dishonesty, we get into, we talk a little bit about Pam Bondi. She's been the fountainhead of a lot of speculation. And on February 26th, she proclaimed on Fox she was going to release the Epstein files. And the Epstein files, she released them, and there are no revelations. I released Epstein's Black Book and flight logs in 2015. We put them up on the internet. And I released more incriminating information on Jeffrey Epstein in 2015 than Pam Bondi and the Department of Justice did in 2025. And what's funny, so I had the Black Book, and I got the Black Book in 2012, and then I finally found someone that was willing to, a platform publisher that was willing to put it up on the internet and let me write some articles about it. And so with the Black Book, we redacted the numbers of everybody in the Black Book. And then there were at least 100 victims in the Black Book, and we redacted their last name and their numbers. But I looked at what Bondi released, and they redacted everything. I mean, we didn't redact the names, but she redacted everything. And at that point, I just knew that this was rather silly. And then Pam Bondi declared that she'd been bamboozled by the FBI's New York field office. And then she said she's got a truckload of evidence, that's a quote, truckload of evidence on the Epstein case. And only matters of national security would be redacted from the documents. So now she has to tell us why a bunch of child molesters have any bearing upon national security. But the crescendo of her mendacity was on May 7th, when she assured us that the FBI and Justice Department would comb through Epstein's huge cache of child abuse material. And this is another quote from our Attorney General. There are tens of thousands of videos of Epstein with children or child abuse material or child porn, and there are hundreds of victims. So I do agree with that there are tens of thousands of videos of Epstein with children or child porn, and there are hundreds of victims. I agree with that 100%. She is saying that the FBI is just looking at that data for the first time. Actually, the day after Jeffrey Epstein was arrested, the FBI opened up his safe. And his safe wasn't like a safe that you think of when you think of, his was the size of a closet. He had a huge safe. And they took out, according to the New York Times, hundreds, if not thousands of DVDs. And then Business Insider reported that they took out 2 hard drives. And the New York Times reported that there were hundreds, possibly thousands of images of child abuse material. So that happened in 2019, and Pam Bondi is telling us that they just sat on Epstein's huge cache of child abuse material, and they're, I mean, it's kind of humorous. And then 6 years later, they're looking at it. They were looking at it that day when they opened up that safe, and they were looking at it that night, and they were looking at it the next day. Probably there were some people in the FBI and the dark, malignant corner of intelligence that deploys people like Jeffrey Epstein that looked at it and didn't sleep because they wanted to see exactly what Epstein. So Pam is lying at this point, and it's really a tragedy that the Trump administration had to come out with that memo. And that memo, I do agree with a couple of things in that memo. I do agree that there's more than 300 gigabytes of child abuse material. I do agree that there's more than 1,000 victims. I disagree that it said that Epstein wasn't pandering these kids to anyone, and they also said that he wasn't involved in blackmail. There have been a number of Epstein victims that have come forward and have said that they were molested by multiple people. Virginia Giuffre named a number of people. And when I got the black book, I noticed that the names of some of the people were circled. And I eventually found that Fredo Rodriguez, he was Jeffrey Epstein's house manager. He circled names that he thought were in cahoots with Jeffrey Epstein as far as his pedophilic entry. The Ghislaine Maxwell, and she was certainly involved. Although, because Jeffrey Epstein is alone now, Ghislaine Maxwell, I guess, ostensibly didn't molest anybody. But anyway, Rodriguez, the name of Ghislaine Maxwell, and Virginia Giuffre, in a sworn affidavit, said that she'd been molested by Ghislaine Maxwell. Rodriguez circled the name of Ehud Barak. He was the former prime minister of Israel. And Virginia Giuffre said that she had been molested by Ehud Barak. Rodriguez circled the name of Les Wexner, who's a billionaire. He owns L Brands, or was the CEO of L Brands. And Virginia Giuffre said that she was molested by him. Rodriguez circled the name of Alan Dershowitz, and Virginia Giuffre said that she was molested by him. Now, she did kind of waffle on that a little bit later, but I've got some ideas about why but we can get into it a little later. And then Rodriguez circled the name of Bill Richardson, who was the former New Mexico governor and also Clinton's energy czar. And Virginia Giuffre said that she'd been molested by him too. And Virginia Giuffre said that she'd been molested by Prince Andrew. Now, his name wasn't circled, so I don't think that Prince Andrew was ever in Florida because Rodriguez didn't circle his name. Although there are a number of numbers for him. So Virginia went up against Maxwell and her reptilian lawyers, and she won. Maxwell ended up, they sued each other for defamation, and Maxwell won, or Virginia won, and Maxwell paid her millions. And she then went up against Prince Andrew, and there was that kind of infamous picture of Prince Andrew with his arm around Virginia. And I think that the Queen came to Andrew's defense and coughed up $12 million for that. So there are a lot of victims in the Epstein case that were molested by multiple perpetrators. Not just Virginia, but there were a number of these girls that were molested by multiple perpetrators. So for the Department of Justice and FBI to say that there were no other perpetrators, they're calling these girls liars. I mean, the best thing you can say to a sexual abuse victim is, I believe you. And the worst thing you can say to a sexual abuse victim is, I don't believe you. And our government has just said, I don't believe you, to scores of victims who have been molested in the Jeffrey Epstein trafficking network. And there was Epstein Victims Compensation Program set up. And that was with Epstein's estate, and that would give settlements to girls that came, or young women at this point, that came forward and said that they were molested by Jeffrey Epstein. So the Epstein Victims Compensation Fund, now the government is saying over 1,000 victims, and I agree with that 100%. But only 225 young women applied for settlements from the Epstein Victims Compensation Fund, and only 150 were rewarded compensation, and then 12 declined, because if you took money from the Epstein Victims Compensation Program, you signed a non-disclosure agreement saying that you would not go after any of your perpetrators. So that was able to shut down these victims that the government couldn't shut down. It was a truly egregious setup. And it was overseen by Jordana Feldman and David Boies. And David Boies is a very dirty lawyer. And I could get into David Boies a little bit, but I'm not going to. I'm just going to say you can go to my website, and also you can go to EpsteinJustice.com, and you can take a look at the things that I've dug up about David Boies. But I started researching and writing about child sex trafficking about 22, 23 years ago, and I've spoken at a number of large conferences. The National Center on Sexual Exploitation has a global summit every year. I've spoken at 3 of those, and I've spoken at a number of other conferences. And I've gotten to know therapists who work with victims of child sexual abuse. And one of them is an eminent psychologist. People in this field, I mean, everybody in this field would know. And she told me that she was working with a client who was under the age of 10 when she was trafficked by Jeffrey Epstein. And her client was able to describe the interior of Epstein's home and a number of other things that she wouldn't have been able to describe had she not been there. And the psychologist helped this young woman try to get a settlement from the Epstein Victims Compensation Program, and she was denied. And then I know another therapist who also, and these are solid therapists, who also counseled someone who said that she had been trafficked by Jeffrey Epstein when she was under 10 years old. And she was denied any kind of compensation from the Epstein Victims Compensation Program. And both these therapists believe that the reason their clients were denied was because they didn't fit into the cover story. And the cover story was that 14 years old was the youngest of the Epstein victims, when we have multiple accounts that these victims were younger than 14 years old. Virginia Giuffre came out with an affidavit in 2015 and said that she had attended various pedophilic orgies and the girls were as young as 12. Most of them didn't speak English because Jean-Luc Brunel, who is a bad actor, he was a modeling agent, and he opened up a modeling agency with Jeffrey Epstein called MC Squared. And he would go to Eastern Europe and buy girls, not rent them, but he would buy girls. And Brunel and Epstein had something worked out with the government where they were able to get, I think, these girls either visas or passports, one or the others, but they were able to get to the United States to be used by all their friends. And what's really bad about this, and as I said earlier, the Trump administration has set back child's rights many years, but according to the Centers for Disease Control, the CDC, our government, 25% of underage girls are trafficked, and 5% of underage boys are molested also. So, and a lot of people in the field think it's slightly conservative for girls and very conservative for boys. But if you just go with the CDC numbers, that's over 50 million Americans have been molested as minors. And then the Department of Health and Human Services commissioned a study, and that study found that between 240,000 and 325,000 women and girls were trafficked in the United States every year. And according to the 2023 Federal Human Trafficking Report, 664 individuals nationwide were charged with child trafficking in 2023. So if we go with the smallest number from that Department of Health and Human Services, if we go with 240,000, only 664 individuals were even charged with trafficking children. And there's millions of hours of child pornography that infest the internet. And according to the U.S. Sentencing Commission, only 1,375 individuals in the U.S. were convicted of crimes entailing child abuse material. So there's a fraction of 1% of people that are molesting people that are under the age and also making child abuse material. A fraction of 1% are charged or arrested or convicted, which is really a travesty in our country. This is something that we have to really work on. And there's a number of reasons why the Epstein case is really important, but we've got millions of sexual abuse victims in the United States. And if we allow the Justice Department to be unresponsive to victims in the Epstein case, a proven child sex trafficking case, that sends a message to millions of victims that they have no voice and no hope for justice. So that's why this case is very important.
Why did Congress take recess just days before the Epstein vote?